In section 9.3, we're just building on this theme of solving triangles that are not right triangles. We've had a lot of experience with those types of triangles, but the law of cosines will help us specifically solve two different types of triangles, the side angle side and the side side side. So here is really three different versions depending on what you are trying to solve for of the law of cosines. It's really not too difficult to use. There is a pattern, as you can see, the two legs that are being added together squared. You'll subtract 2 times the product of those every time, and then it will always be cosine of the angle for this leg squared on the left side of the equation. So maybe spend a little bit of time and you'll get plenty of practice with this assignment. And after you've done a few, it gets quite a bit easier. All right, so let's see the law of cosines in action. All right, so I'm going to go after solving side B. All right, knowing angle B, and I know sides A and C. All right, so side B for the law of cosines would look like this. B squared, I'm going to write out the formula and then we'll fill in the numbers. B squared equals A squared plus C squared minus 2 times AC times cosine angle B. All right, so that's the formula. Now let's fill in what we're trying to, or what we know. We're trying to solve for B. We know what A is. A is 2, so 2 squared is 4. We know what C is. 4 squared is 16, minus 2 times 2 times 4 times cosine for the angle B, which is 45 degrees. All right, so let's simplify this whole right side, and you can basically put all of this in your calculator. Let's just go ahead and grab our calculator now. So I just entered into my calculator 20 minus 16 cosine 45. 2 times 2 is 4 times 4 is 16. And when I did, I got this long decimal, and you don't have to write all this down because we'll be able to do the square root of that with it in your calculator, but I just want to make sure we match. 686 2915, and it keeps on going, 010. So we want to do the square root of that, so you can just, obviously in your calculator, you can just raise this number to the parentheses 1/2. That's an easy way of doing the square root. And I'll do the same thing. And I got 2.95. And that's the measurement for side B. Okay, so that's how the law of cosines works. So let's see if we can find one of the angles, and once we find one of them, then we can just use the 180 degree principle to find the other one. So once again, it really doesn't matter which of these I go after. I'm going to go after angle A, knowing side A, and now I know side B. So let's try that. So A squared, I'll write out the formula. A squared equals B squared plus C squared minus 2BC cosine A. Now, since A is what I'm going to solve for, I'm going to set this up as an equation that is solved for A. Okay, so let's just do a little bit of algebra. I'm going to add 2BC cosine A to both sides, and I'm going to subtract A squared from both sides. It's like I'm going to switch places with these, trying to get A by itself in an equation, because that's essentially what I'm solving for. Okay, so here it is, adding 2BC cosine A and subtracting A squared. All right, and now since I want A by itself, eventually I'm going to be doing the inverse cosine of both sides, I'm going to divide both sides by this 2bc. So anytime you're looking for an angle, you're basically turning your original law of cosines equation into the equation that looks like this, where you can pretty easily solve for the angle. All right, so let's go back and plug in what we know. We know b squared, or we know b, so that's 2.95 squared, plus c squared, which would be 16, minus a squared, which is 4, and all of that's divided by 2 times b, 2.95, times c, which is 4. So we're going to grab our calculator, make sure we use parentheses correctly, and we'll see what we get when we just plug all of this into our calculator, putting parentheses around the numerator and the denominator. Okay, so we'll see if we match cosine A, all of this out of our calculator. I'm just going to round it off. It's 0.87722 rounded. And now we're just going to do the inverse cosine of this number. And I'm running out of space, but maybe I'll just come up here. So A will be the inverse cosine of that decimal. And we'll see if we end up with 28.7 rounded. And plugging that into our calculator, that's exactly what we get. And now, obviously, angle C, we can just do 180 minus 45 minus 28.7, and that gives us the other angle measurement. And that's an illustration of how the law of cosines works. So let's practice with another one. All right, so let's see. I typically look for an angle and an opposite missing side, so I'm going to go after C first. All right, using c squared equals a squared plus b squared minus 2ab cosine c. All right, so I'm looking for c, and I know what a is. 2 squared is 4. You know what b is. 3 squared is 9. 2 times 2 times 3 cosine 95 degrees. All right. So once again, you can basically turn this over to your calculator at this point, plug all of this in, and then don't forget you want to do the square root of that number. So let's go to our calculator and see if we can come up with 3.75 from taking the square root of this. All right, so turns out I just paused and went to my calculator to verify that the answer is correct, and sure enough, I got 3.74778, which would round to 3.75, so that checks. And so now let's work on either of these angles. So I'm going to go after angle A. So a squared equals b squared plus c squared minus 2bc cosine A. All right, so a squared is 4. B squared is 9. C squared, I'll just go ahead and do that, 3.75 squared is 14.06 minus 2 times 3 times 3.75 and cosine A. Well, once again, let me go back. I should have solved this for A like I did before. Got a little carried away. So let's turn this around like I showed you over here. And I think that, you'll get the answer either way, but I think it makes it easier if we just go ahead and set this up so that it's solved for A. So we're basically switching places, and then we'll end up dividing by 2bc in this case. All right, so b squared plus c squared minus a squared divided by 2bc. All right, now let's plug in. Okay, so b squared, 9, c squared, 14.06, a squared 4, all over 2 times b is 3 and c is 3.75. Okay, so we're going to do all of this in our calculator, and then we'll do inverse cosine of that result. So just to see if we match, the result of this is 0.847111, and now we'll do inverse cosine of this, and sure enough, rounded, it becomes 32.1 degrees. So that checks. And now we can use 180 minus 95 minus 32.1, and we will get 52.9. All right, so those are 2 examples of law of cosines. Let's try another one. This is a side-side-side triangle. So let's see how this works. Doesn't really matter where we start. We can just go in order if you like. We can start off with angle A. You really are not wrong by starting with B or C. So I'm going to start with this formula, but remember I'm going to turn it around, but just to make sure you understand, we're going to start off with a squared equals b squared plus c squared minus 2bc cosine A, but since I'm looking for angle A, I'm going to rewrite this as cosine A equals b squared plus c squared minus a squared divided by 2bc. And I showed you earlier how we got that. Okay, plus on there. Okay, so let's plug in b squared. So angle B is here, so 6 squared, or yeah, 6 squared is 36. C squared would be 16. A squared would be 81. 2 times 6 times 4. Okay, so we'll turn over to our calculator and let's put all this in and see what the result is. Okay, and I got a negative 0.60416. I'll just round it to 7. So now let's do the inverse cosine of that number and see what we get. $4,167. And rounded, our angle A is 127.2 degrees. Okay, and so we need to go through this one more time, and I think you probably get it at this point. We need at least one more angle using law of cosines, and you can go through the same procedure and find B. So this would be B squared, and this would be A squared cosine B. So you'll turn this around so that it's solved for cosine B, and see if you can come up with this degree measure. And then once you found 2, of course, you do your 180 degree principle. But that is the law of cosines. That's the kind of thing you'll be practicing on this assignment. We got one more, so you can try this one in class. They seem like they got it pretty well, so we just skipped over number 19. But if you want to try one more just for practice sake to make sure you got it, here are the answers. Again, you would just, since you're given angle A, it makes sense to go after side A first. So use the appropriate equation, and then you got it from there. So this was the assignment that we did to practice the law of cosines. If you have any questions, just let me know.